So this obedience versus authority tension is a real one. And we find ourselves sometimes questioning authority, sometimes questioning the actions of the obedient, but all in all, trying to figure out what is healthy and what isn't, what we should address and what we shouldn't. And it's a constant tension to be managed throughout our lives, and especially in our organizations. So if you don't know, there was this guy, Stanley Milgram, and in the 1960s, he did a really controversial, even to this day, experiment on obedience to authority. He was fascinated by the Holocaust, and he wanted to understand why people hurt other people by simply being given direction. And so he set up this experiment. And there was an experimenter who was leading it, and students participated. If you've been to college, you remember the psychology department always had some experiment you could participate in, and you could sign up for as a student. So there, in this experiment, there was the experimenter, the person leading the experiment, and then there were students that were identified as kind of teachers and students who are identified as learners. And the learners sat on one side and the teachers were on the other, and participants were told to shock another participant, the learner, for giving incorrect actions to a memory task. The shocks increased in intensity and they eventually reached dangerous levels. This was the information the participants were given. However, the learners were actually actors and there was no actual shock being given. There was simply the perception by the people giving the shock in the experiment that it was true. So the results were fascinating because the majority of participants continued to shock the learner even when they showed signs of stress and discomfort. What they've learned is that psychology showed in this study, and the study's been repeated because it's so highly debated and there's discrepancies in who accepts his research. But even when it's repeated, even when they try other methods to test this, the amount of people who were dangerously obedient in these situations and don't speak up is astounding. In his study, he found it to be 80%. Some of the things they learned was the experimenter, the leader of the experiment, wore a lab coat in some cases. It was seen as a critical piece of authority that increased obedience because they believed the experimenter with the lab coat on had knowledge that it was okay and it was safe and that they should do it. In other cases, they put the experimenter in everyday clothes. Obedience levels immediately dropped 20%. Some participants felt badly about their obedience and were harsh on themselves because they thought they hurt someone. Some participants, though, actually stood up and questioned the authority of the experimenter and argued that the learner should be protected. This whole study and the topic of obedience and authority and what is healthy and what is shouldn't and what God is telling us to do with it is just fascinating to me. And it's a tension I feel like I am constantly wrestling with and have been my whole life. And as leaders, I feel like some of that tension is healthy because it is a tension that can protect us from making bad decisions in our own roles and can cause us to also look deeply into those who follow us and have to follow our commands, our plans, our projects, the things we dole out. We should even use it as a filter for how we address different people. But what does it look like to be healthy in authority and healthy in obedience? So first, let's start with a couple things. Let's level set what the term obedience means. So as Christians, as God's anointed, obedience is a practice that we often celebrate and revere in the church. And we should, because obedience by definition is compliance with an order, request, or law, or submission to another's authority. So in the church, as Christians, being obedient means we are submitting to God, who we believe is perfect and our divine creator. If we believe that about him, then his authority should absolutely be fully submitted to, and we should be obedient to it. Obedience, in that sense, comes with the freedom from fear of outcomes because obedience supersedes the outcomes. We say, God, we obey you, and we place the outcomes in your hands. And in a healthy spiritual relationship, we have faith, we have Holy Spirit guidance, and we simply are called to obey and leave the outcomes to God. But what do we do with the less than perfect authority figures in our lives? What do we do with other humans, other broken people? How do we interact with that authority? How do we use our own authority? What level of obedience is acceptable? And the biggest question, when is it okay to push back and challenge authority? And how do we do it well? So the tensions of authority and obedience are not new. They seem to be a constant sociological tug of war. And I just sat in a Bible study room full of people frustrated by it because we started digging into Romans 13. And the whole beginning of Romans 13 is about obedience to rulers. But we're going to get to that in a minute. We're called to obey leaders because God gives them authority. And that's essentially the crux of Romans 13. But first, before we get there, let's break down these two groups of people and dig into what these roles means and our biblical responsibilities to them. So first, we have the obeyer, the person or the team member who sits under the authority figure. As the obeyer, there is a responsibility. In a situation calling us to obedience or calling an employee to obey, the assignment is this. 1, to follow the instructions of authority. Quite simple. 2, to respect order. 3, act on requests and assignments given. Very simple instructions, also very hard to do sometimes. So my first time being asked to leave Sunday school, yes, I said the first, my mother found me in the hallway in 6th grade on a Sunday morning outside of my classroom. She asked what happened, and I had been asked to leave the class. I had a lot of questions and opinions all the time, but on that day, it was about a particular teaching. I still contend it was more denominational bias than scriptural foundation, but I had gotten a little heated with my questioning of the lesson and the opinion of the teacher. And when she met with him at the end of the class, it was not the fact that I was questioning the why or questioning the teaching, but what was problematic was my methods and the level of disrespect and disorder it brought. I had disrupted literally everything going on that day, thereby making the ability for us to have a healthy discussion completely moot. This leads me to that highly contentious word from Paul in his letter to the Romans. I say highly contentious because in that Bible study this week, everyone in the room just had a problem with what they read. And we love Paul and we love his words and the letters of him, but this section is really hard, especially today. Romans 13, 1-5 says, everyone must submit to governing authorities, for all authority comes from God, and those in positions of authority have been placed there by God. So anyone who rebels against authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and they will be punished. For the authorities do not strike fear in people who are doing right, but in those who are doing wrong. Would you like to live without fear of the authorities? Do what is right, and they will honor you. The authorities are God's servants sent for your good. But if you are doing wrong, of course, you should be afraid, for they have the power to punish you. They are God's servants sent for the very purpose of punishing those who do what is wrong. So you must submit to them, not only to avoid punishment, but to keep a clear conscience. It seems so simple, but when we look back at Milgram's research, it's really difficult. And why does it seem like it's half of the story? If we're supposed to submit to our rulers and our authorities, why aren't they better? Or why don't they do better? Or how does that work? And we're going to talk about that in a minute. But for right now, we have the freedom to obey authority. Our team has the freedom to obey authority. And the other benefit of that is they don't have to carry the weight of some of the knowledge you have, but you have responsibilities to them that we'll get to. So as the obeyer, as someone submitting themselves to authority, and remember that is a choice. You get to choose the authority you submit to in your work, in your church organization, in anything you volunteer or serve in the mentors you choose. We have the ability to choose. So keep that in mind. But once you choose and commit. So for someone who's practicing obedience, the first thing is to be respectful. Obedience is a respectful way to be mindful of rules and laws. Consider the source. When obeying someone, consider where they have more information than you do, or if you fear the consequences of disobedience, and really investigate those feelings and think about the authority you've placed yourself under. Also, believe the best in the authority you have chosen to submit to, because that more information piece, we know as leaders, is a really common problem and a common weight we carry. It doesn't mean you can't challenge or ask questions. Next, be aware of conformity. People often conform to perceived norms, sometimes because they're concerned about what others think. The lab coat in the experiment produced conformity because people were afraid to disobey because they were speaking with a perceived authority figure. But that can create problems. Be aware of the dangers of blind obedience. Obeying orders from an authority figure can sometimes lead to disturbing behavior. For example, that study. People went to disturbing lengths to obey the authority they were placed under. As someone who places themselves in authority in different situations, you need to constantly ask yourself, is this something I should question? Is this something that it fits into my values and belief systems? Is this within the boundaries of the expectations we initially set for this role? And if the answer is no to any of those, you should push back. It's acceptable to push back, but you need to do it in healthy ways. Next, consider your own values. Obedience to authority can conflict with your own moral judgment, which is just what I mentioned. If it negatively impacts or goes against what you believe scripturally to be true, if it feels like sin, if it feels unethical, if it feels illegal in the worst case, you absolutely should stand up and not take any steps into obedience, but question it, have conversations, and if any of it is true, remove yourself from that situation. Finally, consider the traits of the law of obedience. The law of obedience includes things like humility, integrity, self-discipline, and service, and most importantly, order. God is not a God of chaos, and we should see that throughout the worlds we serve in. So wherever you are someone who is submitted to authority, and even if it's not at work, it's in other places, be okay with running these thoughts and deciding what's true outside of simply being told what to do and moving forward with the masses. So those are kind of the responsibilities and the crux of being the obedient. It also comes with so much freedom to simply follow along. Some of my favorite service roles outside of work involve more simplistic task of serving and caring for others, because I get to lead in so many other areas. Getting to watch someone else lead and learn to be inspirational and be a part of a team is one, cathartic. It's just mind clearing to do something well and do something that sometimes tires you out, and do something with your family, even some things that your kids can even do beside you. There's something freeing about placing yourself under authority. So if you're a leader in every aspect and you haven't chosen something where you can submit to authority, that's probably a blind spot you should look at and try to understand, because you'll also learn something about your own leadership style and develop personally through that activity. We're going to talk about the scripture surrounding that as well. So we've talked about obedience, but I know most of you listening sit in the seat of authority in most of the areas of your life. And that is where great responsibility comes. So, as an authority figure, we have the responsibility of making sure all those things are not the projects we complete, the missions we run forward on, that they are thought out, they are prayerfully considered, they are healthily delegated, they are encouraged, they are celebrated, they are vision cast, they are followed up on, they are corrected when needed in healthy ways, but that they are led well. It's an important seat, and it's a seat that comes with a lot. So as an authority figure, we have to do 3 things really well and really simply. We have to make decisions, we have to define tasks, and we have to delegate those tasks to others. And I want you to hear in those 3 points for both obedience and authority, we could see where those things could go healthy or unhealthy. We could make decisions that burn things down, or we could make decisions that build things up. And sometimes both are necessary. We could define tasks, but we could define tasks too much or not enough. We could delegate tasks to others, but we could keep a bunch for ourselves or not engage at all with enough information. Everything we do, just like scripture, is called for a certain level of balance. So we need to make sure we're not too far on one side or the other. The weirdest thing about authority is it's considered a role of social influence. It can be defined in a position in the workplace, but honestly, simply being perceived as the authority is enough to carry a weight of an authority figure and to influence people. You got into the seat you're in as a leader probably because that level of influence was viewed in you by somebody who went ahead of you. It might have been spoken into you by somebody who observed it even at a very young age. Someone who's been on the podcast before, Connor West, talked about always kind of being seen as a leader from childhood. And there are some of you listening who have felt that their whole lives. So just remember, authority already kind of exists within you. And we have responsibility with that authority. In obedience, the obedient followers have the responsibility to submit and maintain order. Authority has the responsibility to serve that team. Matthew 20, starting with verse 25, going on to 26, says, "But Jesus called them together and said, 'You know that the rulers in this world lord it over their people, and officials flaunt their authority over those under them. But among you, it will be different. Whoever wants to be a leader among you must be your servant.'" It is imperative that as faith-forward leaders and figures of authority in so many areas that we lead through servant leadership. We do not need to lord over people or flaunt our authority or state and restate our seat of authority. We simply should lead so well that we are socially influential, and we do it under God's authority so that others follow and do it well. So, authority, while fun for most of us listening, it comes with a lot of rules. Authorities have to do a few things well. 1, providing advice. You have to know the team you're working with, and you have to provide advice that is grounded, tailored, biblical, ethical. You have a lot that you have to do well when it comes to that communication. We also have to act as lead regulators. Authorities act as the lead director for the organization or project, and others must consider their advice when they move forward with their work. So if we aren't directing things well or giving sound advice, the team can't move forward. They're stuck. They're waiting to hear from you, or they're confused by what they heard. So we have to do that well. Authorities approve consistency. Authorities help ensure the rules and the parameters of the project are applied consistently and fairly to a business. I just had a conversation last week with an organization I serve with where we go in and diagnose problems in ministry. And it's not problems in ministry that we just see. We're invited in, we run a diagnostic, and we present what's going on to the church or organization that has asked us to come help. One of the main components of organizations that are struggling in the ministry sector are rules are not applied consistently. Someone is held accountable to the ninth degree, and someone is given grace. And it doesn't always make sense, other than maybe it depends on the relationship they have. Or a rule about budgeting is held firmly on this side, or it is completely ignored for reasons X, Y, and Z by senior leadership. As authority, the healthiest way we can lead is to bring consistency so that those who serve on our teams understand with clarity that it is as fair as it can possibly be. They know the framework they're working within, and they aren't afraid to move. So improve consistency. Improve information sharing. Authorities improve information sharing. As authority figures, we are accountable for healthy communication, and lots of it. Does each aspect of your project, does each department in the team know what's going on in the others? And do they have the critical information to move forward? Do they know when something changes on the fly or where there's a hang up? If you aren't making sure those things are happening, and it doesn't mean that we personally communicate everything, but we personally build a team and a structure that those obeying our authority know how to do that well and communicate to each other well. That's how we lead that. Authorities create plans and communicate those plans, and authorities provide a single point of contact. Unfortunately, and yes, most of my references to work are negative, and I'm working on it, but it's a work in progress. Primary authorities, us. Authorities are the throat to choke in the project, the department, and the organization. And we should feel that a little bit, not the crippling weight of it, but the weight of what we do and the decisions we make are under our authority. We are responsible for them, and we are accountable to them, because it will help shape the way you make decisions and lead your team. So years ago, it took me a while to learn this part. It took me a while to understand all these pieces of authority. Years ago, I was offered an opportunity to pursue a consulting position straight out of college. And it was with an organization that I actually served with in college. So it was kind of this crazy thing, like, you want me to consult? I'm a brand new baby, but nice. It involved travel, doing some of the things I totally loved most. And I had in college put up some insane numbers for this organization with the team I led. And I was extremely cocky about it too. I'm sure in my own mind, I thought I was amazing. That is not how I feel anymore. I am a big batch of cautionary tales in the workplace. I went through for this position phone screens, and then I was flown out for an in-person. I had the perfect graduation interview suit, of course, and researched plenty about the position and the history of the firm. And essentially I was ready to nail it. Everything was going swimmingly. I flew home waiting on the offer. I got a phone call a couple days later, and I excitedly answered, and immediately I could tell it wasn't going to go my way. And all I could think in that moment was, what happened? And these people are insane not to put me on their team. So a few months later, it took me a while to let go. A few months later, I did kind of a personal postmortem on the whole experience. And I remember still to this day being asked one key question that I now know was my downfall and is some of my, one of these many excellent cautionary tales. So I got asked this: what would you do if the site you're visiting and the team you're visiting doesn't use your game plan in the final project? Like, what if they don't like your idea and they choose a different direction? So without hesitation, I thought this was like a linchpin moment. I distinctly remember stating, if they choose to make a bad decision, that's on them. I hope you just cringed when you heard me say that. And if you did it, you might want to check your own authority leadership style, because in one single statement, I had proven myself a weak communicator and an irresponsible dictator lacking in accountability to garner a win. In short, I was clearly not ready for the role. But why was I not ready? Because authority on its own is simply not enough. Definitively, authority is engaging when it is influential. Authority is effective when it's paired with responsibility and accountability. So now what do we do with this information as leaders? How do we handle the disobedient follower? Well, first, we have to investigate our own lack of authority with the person. Authority being a form of social influence, we have to fight the desire to become emotional or demanding with someone like that. It only further weakens our leadership position. So ask ourselves why this person struggles with our authority. And if you are bold enough and open enough, ask them. We move much more quickly relationally when we are unabashed in addressing the elephant in the room. I used to be terrible at this. And I remember a leader really challenging me to lead a hard conversation with the elephant in the room. And it was a game changer for me. So now I make sure it's the first thing I say so that I don't avoid it altogether. How do we address the disengaged leader or follower? Well, we have to foster collaboration. Ask yourself, why is there a lack of engagement? Invite them into every conversation and meeting. Ask their opinion point blank. And if you don't get an answer or you don't get what you need as you're watching this and monitoring and you're not seeing them engage, we need to avoid the urge to quickly discredit or cut them out of the conversation altogether, simply because it's a lot of work sometimes to get someone talking. If nothing else, again, boldly go in and ask the hard questions to understand. I have countless times seen someone light up and catch fire from a difficult conversation about why they weren't engaging in something, and seen someone let me know something is decidedly not for them, sometimes even leaving the organization. But I'll tell you this, in both occurrences, I leave with clarity and relief no matter the outcome, because I'm no longer wondering. It's such a beautiful thing when the questions are answered. Even in a follower role, we are responsible for our own actions, clarifications, and deliverables, and that sometimes requires a healthy challenge to our authorities. So if you're in a seat of obedience and you're questioning authority, that can be healthy. You simply need to plan out the conversation, seek it head on, and do it with love. Now, the hardest question, in my opinion, and what seems to commonly be avoided in our organizations, our ministries, even our families sometimes, is how do we handle that overbearing authority? So going back to Milgram's study, which is, like I said, hotly debated, challenged, and recreated over the years with very little change in statistical result, I might add. Why is demanding, damaging, and subversive authority allowed and sometimes the fastest growing in an organization? Some of the CEOs that are most successful tend to be those that some have some of the hardest personnel issues, the biggest turnover. And for some reason, we allow it. So why is that? And we've seen the research from Milgram's study, but I also propose it's largely because from Milgram's results, we simply don't choose to deal with it. Remember, authority must be paired with influence, responsibility, and accountability. So as a member of an organization, if you report to someone, you still are given the authority to communicate with that person and engage in all types of feedback with them. So speak up, because that includes a responsibility to be honest about things that need to change. If this gives you pause, if this makes you uncomfortable to think about, again, investigate the why within yourself and address it. We get to choose what we do every day. And sometimes the fear of change is enough to keep someone in an unhealthy and toxic situation. So just stop choosing it. As a leader in an organization, we also are responsible to identify our own problems. And if they are toxic, either adjust and grow to neutralize that problem in ourselves, or maybe even find a role more suitable for us. How does that work, you might ask, as a CEO or someone who founded something that's now grown? It works just like I said. You find the seat that you enjoy, that you're equipped to do, that gives you the most sleep at night, and put really successful winners in all the seats you don't want to be in. And create a structure that protects you from yourself. And create a structure of people you can trust to help you protect you from yourself. That's what we have to do. If your insecurity or your skill set cannot grow in alignment with your organization's growth, we become the problem in our organization's growth. And the last thing any of us want is that. So how do we as leaders, or if you're especially top level leaders, diagnose a problem like that within ourselves? Because it's very hard, especially in a toxic environment, to get that feedback from your team, because they're usually too afraid to give it. So I ask this: who is actually in a full throttle, iron sharpening iron relationship with you? How many hard things have you heard from them over the years? How have you reacted to those hard things? And if every time it was poorly, or if it was confrontational, then that's a conversation you need to have first, because my guess would be is that there are things they haven't told you out of fear or just exhaustion. So find someone who can do a true iron sharpens the iron relationship with you. Your spouse can be one, but that is not enough. So find someone ahead of you in life, in their career, to speak into your leadership and speak into the traits of how you run your organization, and create an environment for your team to tell you those things as well. And when your team comes to you for the first time, maybe, and tells you something that is a healthy challenge on your leadership, react well and receive it. Process it, and then decide what pieces you need to take action on, what you simply need to think about, and what maybe isn't value added at all. If any of these things stress you out as we're talking about them, it's you. You're the problem. It's you. And I've been the problem before in insecure times in leadership. So we've all been there, and it can be seasonal, but it can also be something that goes on forever if we don't deal with it. So in short, to build a healthy team, to have promotability and grow your team from within, we love internal promotions. They're a lot easier than having to start fresh from the outside. To build stability, we have to have healthy authority and obedience without conformity. If you find yourself saying the team should challenge unhealthy authority anyway, remember Milgram's study and follow up that the DISC statistics also kind of point to the same thing. DISC personality survey says roughly 67% of the population is wired to be steady. So they're not wired necessarily to have these difficult change-oriented conversations. But that means we as leaders and authority figures have to assume the best and choose to have the hard conversations with ourselves, with our mentors, and with the offenders on our team. It's very common in middle management or in new leaders that have promoted for these behaviors to exhibit and need to be addressed quickly and developed out of before they become long-term problems. They're simply learning how to do it, and you have to help them get there and help them get there with courage, with strength, and just with a steadiness. But unfortunately, as leaders, the hard conversations are our responsibility. We've chosen that seat. Our teams are our teams because they did not want that responsibility. So whomever the partner or department head on your team has been popping up in your mind right now as we talk about this, that hothead, that emotional leader, the uninvolved leader, the micromanager, it's on us until we address it. Because remember, we are accountable and responsible as the authorities. Finally, don't forget the fun side of authority. We get to choose progress. We get to choose the projects to take on, the dreams to toss around, where to direct vision, how to speak into our teams and get them excited, what we should let go of that isn't important anymore, and who is on our team to run with us. That's a pretty amazing assignment if we honor it and do it well and serve them. So while it can be mesmerizing to us, our teams equally love the freedom to not do any of those things and simply get to commit and serve and contribute to their part of the organization with excellence. So make sure to thank them for that, foster that, and reflect on if both your authorities and your obeyers in your organization are fulfilling their roles to support their vision, support the vision, represent the values, and make things grow